What a difficult task for a man as heralded as John Beliveau to sit through a night-long, unending line of tribute, because I'm sure, and I grew up in my early days, that one of the first jobs you get on a newspaper when you start is writing the obituary column. And I know the experience of a speaker that by the time they're finished giving the long chronological history of your past achievements, and in his case they are very lengthy, that you always expect that someone is going to hit you on the head with a spade and bury you. And while the tribute has been glowing to date, I might say that I'm going to add the final touch to the obit. And while I need very few notes on John Beliveau, our host tonight, who we should acknowledge, the Bank of Nova Scotia, with whom he's associated, on behalf of Scotiabank Hockey College, did send me a very long and interesting dossier on his background. And while I'm largely familiar with them, in rereading them I was reminded of many things, and I thought I might share this information, though it's somewhat long, somewhat embarrassing to John, but of interest to all of us here who are hockey fans. And one thing I believe in, that you know, in many parts of this country we've had a continuing debate about language. And I say there are not two languages in this country, there are three. There's English and there's French, or French and English, and there's a third universal in this nation that carries from Newfoundland through to the Northwest Territories, and that is the great universal of hockey. It's been our third language, and as I say, the universal factor for all of us who grew up in this country. And our pleasure tonight to have one of the all-time great figures in the National Hockey League, a man who not only had a distinguished career on the ice lanes, but a man who has served this country so well in an ambassadorial role as well as a merchant role since then. John Beliveau was born in Three Rivers, Quebec in 1931. He first played hockey in Victoriaville, later graduated to junior A hockey with much distinction with the Quebec Citadels. Now, rather interestingly, he played senior hockey in Quebec for 2 years before turning professional with the Montreal Canadiens, which he did, I believe, in 1953, and of course his career is well known to us. He was 10 times on the All-Star team. During his NHL career, he was the all-time Montreal Canadiens club scoring leader with 507 goals, 712 assists for 1,219 points. He won the Art Ross Trophy as the leading scorer, the Hart Trophy as the most valuable player on 2 years in 1956 and 64. As well, he won the Conn Smythe Trophy as being the most valuable player or the most outstanding performer in the 1965 Stanley Cup playoffs. He retired in 1971. And while there are many other distinctions there, as I mentioned, he was on the All-Star team 10 years. One of the great things about a hockey player, and there are many great individual players, but probably the greatest tribute to John Beliveau, and I'm sure the most satisfying thing to him in his own career, is that he was on 10 Stanley Cup champion teams in 18 years with the Montreal Canadiens. And while there have been many great individual performers, there have been few who've had that distinction. My pleasure, on behalf of Dartmouth and the Chamber of Commerce, to introduce John Beliveau, one of Canada's authentic great heroes, to the microphone. John.
Thank you very much, Arne, for this very kind introduction. Guests and confrères of the head table, ladies and gentlemen. Probably it would have been a good thing for me to stay in Montreal. I think it would have been better served with Arne as pitching in for me. I'm sorry if I'm a little late, but it's one of those days when all of you understand and knows that sometimes we work on a very tight schedule. I've been honorary chairman of a skating marathon, which started last year, and is presented in the Man in His World site. and it's turned out to be a pretty good success. We had many thousands of children and grown-up today on a beautiful day, skating in the canals around the pavilion, and the proceeds were for a good cause. I wish to express very sincerely my thanks to the Chamber of Commerce for this very kind invitation and the opportunity you're giving me to meet you all and back in Dartmouth and visit again your beautiful province. I've been here on many occasions. I believe the first time in 1969 on the occasion of the first Canada game. I believe I remember one morning we attended track and field, I believe, which beautiful track, and I'm sure is still around. For many years, I had the great pleasure to be part of the Canadian team in the tuna fishing near Yarmouth, Cape St. Mary. And matter of fact, a little later this month, I believe on the 26th, I'm going to spend the day with the students at the St. Anne University in Church Point in Digby, I believe. I was very impressed when I came in with the beautiful building. What I've seen is just there's a size, and by the food we have just eaten, I want to extend to the chef and the people who were involved personal congratulations, because I think you have a very wonderful place. To the Chamber of Commerce, I have the opportunity to go across this beautiful country, and I know what you're doing, and I know that you have done here and help and work with the members of City Hall for the good of your city. I think it shows, and you have done it for many years, and accept on my behalf my congratulations for what you have done, and I'm sure for what you intend to do in the future. I know there's many cities, and I'm sure it's the same with your member of council here, are counting on the Chamber of Commerce. And I know that you have requests from the City Hall and from many organizations your help. And you have always come up, and I'm sure that in the future the same will be done. Hockey has been, no doubt, a great part of my life. And when I go across this country, there's a few questions who are coming up. One of them is about expansion. A lot of people, especially those of my generation, people who were the generation ahead of me, are asking me if this expansion in hockey was good. I personally believe yes, because you know, in life, if you don't progress, you regress. And you remember in early 1970, 71, when the NHL went through the first expansion in 67, 68, 6 new teams joined the NHL to make it 12. And people of my generation are saying it was a lot easier to watch a hockey game on Saturday night because we knew all the players, and it's very difficult now. And I'll agree with you, because myself, when I attend a game, I need a program too, because we have the visit of the team only on the 2 occasions. But you remember in early 70s, a new league came in. And I believe that if the NHL would like to go back to maybe 12 or 14 teams, there's always a danger that we will have to face the same situation that hockey faces in 72, in 73, 74, which to me were the very dark years of hockey, when instead of working towards upgrading the game, we were fighting each other, spending all kinds of money, and we had no other choice. People are asking me, is the hockey as good? Well, the talent is divided amongst 21 teams. I'm sure there's as many as good hockey players today than in our time. If we would take the best players of the 21 team and reduce the league to 6 teams, I'm pretty sure that we could come up with teams who were as good, and maybe in certain occasion, certainly as good and maybe better than we had in our time. Another question is about the present situation, what's happening to Canadian. I think there's several reasons. I think one is that the fans kind of forget that the Canadian organization lost in the last 3 or 4 years 3 great guys, 3 great hockey minds in Sam Pollock, in Scotty Bowman, and Al McNeil. And I don't think they have been replaced. And any organization in sport or in any other way of life will suffer. And there is no doubt that we are certainly missing those 3 great men. Another point is that for those who follow hockey very closely, you remember that our reserve have always played a very important point, a great part in many of our championship and Stanley Cup. 2 years ago, I personally believe that the philosophy of the league changed. They want to attain a certain parity, and I think they have achieved in a very short time, 2 years. They have done great work. And I kind of agree that for fans, it's probably more interesting to go to a hockey game when you don't know who's going to be the winner. And in the past, on too many occasions, I believe that the people who attend the game in the Forum, maybe 8 out of 10, were pretty sure that Canadian will win, which is not the case now, not only with us, but I think this year, any team can beat anybody on any given night. But this change in rule, and I mean by that the draft that we have at the end of training camp in October is really hurting us. Why is it hurting us more than others? I personally feel that when Mr. Selke Sr. and after that Sam Pollock came in and take charge of the Canadian organization, decided that reserve farm teams was very important. And Canadian built this farm system. And when this new rule came, law in the NHL, we bound to lose a lot of our players. And 18 players for a professional organization, it's not much. Now you're going to tell me that we have, people are complaining right now that we have 4 or 5 players too many. It's true. But when it comes time to make your list, it's very difficult. You cannot protect everybody, and it can cause the organization to take a very serious decision, which was criticized by our fans with reason. When we have to leave certain players aside who has been serving us for many years, but management has no other choice than take this decision. Are we going to protect 32 or 33 in sport? Unfortunately, it starts to be young, but are you going to protect a 32 or a 33-year-old and leave a 20-year-old go to another team? And this has caused us quite a bit of problems. But I think the philosophy, this new philosophy of the league, I believe it's good for the game. I have to be very objective and honest about it. And when we go to meetings, I can assure you that everybody is voting against us because they have all better teams in the league. They are playing much better in front of their fans. And I think for the game, I have to admit, it's probably a good decision, but in a short time for us, it's a rough decision. I'm sure that I could keep on talking about this, but maybe, Arne, if people will have some question, maybe they have on their mind, on hockey, on a Canadian, or whatever, maybe it will make them, for them, more interesting than just talk about hockey in general. So I think it will make the evening more interesting while I'm here to be able to answer to their question. And if anybody has some, I'd be well and willing, as long as you want, to answer those questions. So
I have one that I might start off. What is John Belivau's formula for defeating the Russians? And this comes from the president of the Chamber of Commerce, who a few minutes ago was bilingual, and now he's shy. He's asking me to ask the question. How should we play the Russians? What can we do to beat them?
Well, I still feel that that we're still better than the Russian. But I think we have to prepare ourselves in a better way. The last series in New York, if you remember that series about 2 years ago, I went to that series, and I remember players coming in on Sunday night or Monday morning because they had game in the NHL on Sunday. I get together for team pictures on Monday noon or Monday afternoon, practice one on Tuesday, and the first game is on Wednesday. Where the Russian went to Holland, rented an arena, had the board reshaped the size of North American ice surface, and practiced there for a month. So I think they have a much better preparation. Now, why shall we stop our schedule? And I certainly don't agree that we change our way. I really believe that the fastest solution would be to have a division of professional hockey in Europe. But there's many serious obstacles. One of them is that teams from Russia, Czechoslovakia, are in the eastern part of Europe. And maybe their ideology is not exactly what we have here in North America. So to me, if we had a 6-team division in Europe, having an interlocking schedule, having them play the same number of games that we play here, and at the end of the year, having a real finals for the Stanley Cup or the World Cup or whatever you call it, will really tell us who's the best. But right now, all their system is geared towards the World Tournament and all the publicity that they can derive from such a tournament.
Questions?
Beliveau, you mentioned, before I ask my question, I must say that you were one of my favorite hockey players of all time, although I detest the Montreal Canadiens.
If we all cheer for the same team, it'd be no fun.
You mentioned that in the short term, the way that the thing is arranged right now may not be good for the Montreal Canadiens, but in the long term it may be good for the National Hockey League. If in the short term it is not good for the Montreal Canadiens, I'd like to ask a question, maybe you can shed a little bit of light on this. Is that Montreal had the first draft choice last spring, and it chose Doug Wickenheiser, and he has been used very rarely. Whereas other teams in the first, second, and third rounds have players who are contributing very heavily towards their team. So Montreal was fortunate enough to have the first round draft choice, the first of the first round draft choice, and he has not really been used to, to maybe his full potential, or maybe they made a mistake and should have chosen somebody else.
I don't think they made a mistake. Wickenheiser is only 19 years old. And you have this rule, if you picked a junior, you have to keep him or return or having go back to his junior team. Now, one of our, I think, weakness is we need a couple of big men up front. Thursday night, after Guy Lafleur made a few statements, and I think sometimes a good storm cleared the weather, Wickenheiser basically a hard-checking game is not his game, but he's a big guy. He's a big center. Since Pete Mahavlich left, we could add use. But I was asking a friend, I said that Thursday night, the four center were Mondu, LaRoche, Riceboro, and Jarvis. And we have Keith Acton and Wickenheiser. I said, which of the four would you have taken out? And that's one of the problems that we're facing. We have 6. But to go back to this draft in October, this coming October, we won't be able to protect more than 18. And next year, 17. So we're lucky that this large farm system that we had, we still have a few more players, but in a couple of more years, we'll be even with everybody. And I think that's the philosophy of the league. Now, to counteract that, it becomes very important that it's always been important, but scouting becomes very important. With 21 teams in the league, you cannot afford to make mistake on your first draft choice or second, because the pool in hockey is not as big as in football, basketball, or football, or baseball in the States, where there's 700 or 800 players, young players. No, I think Wickenheiser has great talent. Don't forget, it took 3 years to get Lafleur before it's really on track.
Why in heaven's name doesn't the Canadian organization improve the PR aspects of the Voyageurs down here? It's in horrible shape.
I know what you mean. I don't want to sidestep or sidetrack at this situation. Unfortunately, on one situation, I think that we all understand. When I was informed it was done, I cannot comment on it because I don't think it's finished. I think it will be childish on my part to make any comments on a situation that could go in higher up. But there is no doubt, I understand and I know what you mean, and we realize that in a beautiful building that like you have here, to have maybe only 16, 18, 2,000 people, it's no good for anybody. It's no good for the management of the building, it's no good for those who are involved, and it's no good for the player themselves. There's nothing worse than playing in an arena of 9 or 10,000 if there's only 14 or 16,000. I understand what you mean, and you can be assured that I will rely to those who are directly involved, how you, and I'm sure you're representing probably all the fans around this part. Thank you very much for your very kind reception, and I hope you have a nice evening. Thank you.
Welcome back to another Black Horizons program. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. Last week on our Black Horizons program, we indicated to you that the month of February has been set aside in many parts of North America, particularly the United States,
in parts of Canada is Black History Month. During the month of February on our Black Horizons program, we will be looking at various aspects of black history. In our program today, we'll be looking at the history of West Africa, more particularly the history of a particular important region of the West African area. The history of West Africa is not only important in its own right, it's important as well to the understanding of Afro-American history, and by extension, the history of Canada and Nova Scotian blacks. Because of the slave trade, most black people in North America are descendants from the members of West African kingdoms and tribes. In today's Black Horizons program, we will be looking at the history of one of those ancient African empires, the Empire of Ancient Ghana. I have with me as my guest on the Black Horizons program today, Joe Mensah, who is the research coordinator of the Black United Front and a former resident of the Republic of Ghana. Welcome, a citizen, former citizen of the... Still a citizen right. Of the Republic of Ghana. Welcome to the Black Horizons program,
Thank
Joe.
You. Thank you.
I think maybe it might be appropriate at the beginning of the program to orient our viewers to the area of West Africa that we'll be talking about. Mm-hmm. And I guess perhaps one of the first things we should point out is that the existing, and of course you'll perhaps be commenting on this later, but the existing Republic of Ghana, as we now know it, is actually 1,000 miles south of the ancient African Ghana Empire, which will be what we'll be talking about today. Mm-hmm. I wonder if perhaps you might just, for the purposes of our viewers, just turn to the map that we have behind us here and perhaps orient our viewers to the area of Africa that we'll be talking about generally.
Well, we'll be looking, this is the map of Africa, and this is West Africa, and we'll be looking mainly around this area: Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, and Nigeria, Dahomey, Togo, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Guinea, Senegal, and Senegal. Basically, these areas will be examined today.
Okay. I wonder if perhaps you might just...
And to some extent, the Sudan area, they're so close, Chad and Sudan, you've heard of recent conflict between it's just a question of artificial boundary between them. So we are looking around entire geographical region, this area.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this area that we're talking about is just to the, I guess you'd say, the south of the Sahara Desert area, which would include the northern portion of Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and so on. Mm-hmm. And between that Sahara area and then on the south, the more forested area of Africa. That's generally the area that's referred to as West Africa. Mm-hmm. I wonder if perhaps you might just explain. We've talked a bit about the countries and the location there. If you just might explain a little bit about the principal peoples mm-hmm. of West Africa.
What you mean current West Africa?
In terms of the peoples that were at the time of the empire that we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, I see. Well, we had the principally most of people who are living in current West Africa yes. were still residents yes. Of the area. But when we talk about the ancient Ghana Empire, we were talking in terms of the Mande-speaking people, or the Sonekis, as we may refer to them. Those are they were the principal occupants of the ancient Ghana at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I wonder if perhaps you might, we have another map here where we locate the actual, more specifically, the actual location of the ancient empire of Ghana. I wonder if perhaps you could refer to that map. I don't know if we can get tuned in, the fellows on the camera can tune in here to this map perhaps, and we can explain just what the boundaries.
Well, it's like between the Western Sahara and the forest, Western Sahara, which is somewhere around the Sudan area, and also the forest, the southern forest area. And it originates from the Senegal River right down, which is in present Senegal, right down to the tip of the Niger River, somewhere around there, the ancient empire.
I see. And as we pointed out in our opening remarks, the empire then would be located considerably north of what is now known as the Republic of...
Present Ghana.
Right. I think our viewers might be interested to know about where we get our information about this empire. As we'll learn as we go along in the program, the empire is a very old, very ancient community. Where does most of the information, where do we get most of our information about this empire?
Well, most of the information, as you know, African history and culture has been much more oral in its nature. There were hardly any recorded documents. So most of information we know about the ancient Ghanaian Empire came from Arabic sources, Arab scholars who were in contact with Africa from time immemorial. They recorded this information. So what we know about Ghana today came from Arabic sources.
Right. How strong, over and above the Arabic sources that you refer to, just as a bit of an aside for a moment, how strong is the oral tradition in this particular part? For example, do the people that are there now, do they talk about the ancient Ghana Empire as part of their oral tradition? Which is
yes, I think that is the main reason we were able to trace people of modern Ghana were able to trace their origin to the ancient Ghanaian Empire because of that kind of oral tradition.
Right. Well, we mentioned that the empire was a very early one. What period, basically in chronological years, was the empire covered by? When did it begin and when did it end, roughly?
Well, it began somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd century AD. And according to historians, it ended somewhere between the 9th and the 11th century. There's tradition which also says that the kingdom existed somewhere around 622 AD. But however, according to some Arabic sources, it's somewhere between the 3rd and 4th century that the empire began to be much more prominent. And as I mentioned, it located somewhere between the Sahara in western Sudan and then the southern forest area, somewhere near the Great Niger Bend, somewhere around the River Niger. Where is the River Niger? Here is it. Yeah, somewhere. He ended up somewhere there anyway. And the heartland was northwest or northeast of the Senegal River, which is here. Yes, River Senegal. And northwest of the Niger River. Again, where's the River Niger? Somewhere there. Yes. So we're talking about area covering something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Now, what do we know from you've talked about the Arabic sources and we've talked a bit about the oral tradition of the people of the area. What do we know about the origins? Who founded the empire?
Well, again, there are contradictory evidence as to who founded the empire. Some spoke of people who were looking in appearance, looking white. Others spoke of predominantly people of Negro races or black, which as we call it today, who founded the empire. There's also the confusion arises as to whether the people whom we assume, or the historians assume to be white looking, were actually Caucasians. Because in modern Ghana, somewhere in the south eastern area of the Volta River, in modern Ghana, state of Ghana, we had people who are conspicuously fair-skinned. As you see some black people who can more or less pass for whites, you can see some people, a whole village area look like that, even though from time immemorial they might not have had any contact with Caucasians. So it's likely that the historians might have mistaken those people for, say, Caucasians. But there's documented evidence that from Arabic sources that predominantly the rulers of the ancient empire were people of Negro race or the black race. And it was until towards the end of the 11th century, when the empire, in fact, was decaying, that the Arabs who have had some influence in the area at the time, or have lived there, there were sections of the capital which is called Kumbi. At that particular point in time, there was an Arabic section and then the so-called Negro or black section at the time. They ensured that the empire didn't fall at that particular point in time. So there was coexistence, actually, to be frank, between the people of the black race and the Arabs.
Berbers, largely. From
The
North
Berbers,
Africa,
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I want to come back a little bit later and talk a bit about the people who actually form part of the empire, and some information about their language and their characteristics and so on, and we'll develop this point perhaps a little further. But I'd be curious if you might explain, or would like for you to explain perhaps, some of the factors. Why did this empire come into being when it did, so to speak? What were the factors that were responsible for the coming into being of this empire in the first instance?
Well, I imagine, according to history, the empire gained prominence as a result of the trans-Sahara trade. And the trans-Sahara trade was mainly in gold and salt. The empire is very interesting. Gold was not much found in Ghana at the time, but somewhere around Wangara area here. The gold was found there to the south of Ghana, and also the north. Mainly the salt deposits are found somewhere around here, as you can see on the map. But for some reason or another, Ghana laid at a particular spot which was very favorable for the trans-Sahara trade. So the rulers of the ancient empire more or less attempted, in fact, to some extent, they invaded these areas, Wangara, and also the salt deposit area, and they managed to obtain control of these regions. So actually, they never had those minerals themselves, not that much of it, but they were able to take control of it and expand their influence. And by so doing, and also because of the location where they are and the route, the trans-Sahara trade, and you can see the route from here right to the North Africa. And because of that, that's what gave the empire that kind of prominence it occupied at the time. And of course, the influence of its rulers at a particular point in time.
Right. So it owed its existence then to the trade in these two commodities back and forth with the northern portions of Africa. In your opening remarks, you referred to the Mandingo people as being the people who inhabited this ancient empire.
Right.
I'd like to move now to a discussion of the people and perhaps discuss some of the characteristics of the people. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about the Mandingo peoples, their language and their perhaps physical characteristics?
Well, again, when it comes to physical characteristics, those Mandingos we were referring were, according to Arabic scholars, they were blacks. And naturally, they had some of the characteristics that you and I do have. I don't think much have changed. Of course, when you look on the African continent as a whole, as you move from one spot to another, there are definite physical changes in physical features. You can tell who is, say, for instance, somebody from East Africa as opposed from somebody from the West. It's very easily, too, if you are a very careful observer, to discern who is from, say, northern Ghana to somebody who is from Nigeria and so forth. But basically, there's fundamental, discernible physical characteristics that they did have.
Well, you were talking earlier, commenting about the confusion among the scholars as to whether or not the founders were Negroid in origin or what we might consider today to be Caucasian in origin. Were not the Mandingo people very Negroid people, but at the same time very fair, tall people?
Yeah, they were fair, they were tall.
Could this perhaps have led maybe to the confusion, maybe to a person who in comparison, say, to some of the darker peoples in the West Africa area, maybe they, by comparison, they might have made
Yeah,
that
that's
kind of-
what I maintained earlier. It's possible. No one knows for sure. But then again, even if we look at the history of modern Ghana, there are legends which states that some of their ancestors might have stayed as far back in the even as far back as in ancient Israel. To what extent this is the truth, I don't know. But I think there was much trade and movement between Africa, especially the northern area, and the Middle East at that particular point in time, that I'm inclined to believe that some sort of intermingling of the races might have occurred, and that could possibly attribute to the skin texture or the color of some of the people being mentioned about. If you take a place like northern Nigeria, for instance, as far you go to the north and you find the physical characteristics and the skin and everything differs from what you might find in, say, Yoruba area or the, say, eastern Nigeria and so on and so forth. One doesn't know for sure. The historians are not very, very sure about that. But I assume that because of that kind of interaction between the blacks and people from the Mediterranean area, the Arabs from there, that might probably have resulted in
the different skin textures, as you say.
Yeah.
What
possibly.
about the activities? What could we expect to be the activities of the inhabitants of the empire? What were they principally involved in? What was their livelihood?
They were basically involved in two areas: the Trans-Sahara trade, which was, as I mentioned earlier, was mainly in gold and salt. But even though the present capital of the then nation Ghanaian Empire, Kumbi, is now a desert area. According to history, it was known to be very, very fertile area, and therefore a large proportion of the population were peasants.
Right, or farmers.
Farmers, yes,
suppose, right?
yes.
Now, Ghana was operated under a system of kingdoms, as I understand it. There was a king. What can you
Right.
tell us about the Ghanaian kings? What kind of people were they, and what kind of court did they keep, and so on?
Well, the Ghanaian kingdom was very, very strong in the first place because, as you realize, it attempted to more or less invade some of the neighboring areas. So it has a strong administrative system at that particular point in time. It has a strong military system where the king had so many warriors, estimated in one instance that there were over 200,000 warriors. And at the same time, it had a cavalry, horses, and that in fact helped in their invasion of other areas, neighboring areas, and that also facilitated, as probably someday we might talk about, the formation of the Songhai empires. This cavalry or the horses had played a particular role. But the king had a supreme authority. He often sat in his pavilion, surrounded by horses and pages or servants, you may call them, and there he listens to people and administer justice. Often found around him are sons and daughters of governors and princes from the empires or the surrounding areas which the king has conquered. And usually the royal session starts with the beating of drums. And it's very important that if you look at the Ghanaian, modern Ghanaian system, it's exactly the same. The Asante, for instance, is often flanked by that kind of thing, and no Ghanaian ruler, the beginning of any royal session of modern Ghanaian republic begins with the beating of these drums. In fact, more or less, almost nearly many things that they did is still perpetuated in the modern era, except the fact of the horses are not being used in royal sessions at the moment. But there's no question about that. That strong link is still there. One important thing to the king there is usually adorned with ornaments such as gold. And at the same time, he was usually wearing gold cloth. Now, this gold cloth might be the modern kente cloth that we use in Ghana, because that is very rich looking. I don't know whether you have seen one. I happen to have one home. It's very, very rich looking. And if you look like the Asantehene, for instance, or some of the rulers in Ghana, they are usually well adorned with gold, and the scepter that they use, or the linguists use, is they are franked by gold, and it was the characteristics of the ancient Ghanaian king at the time.
Right. Well, we've talked repeatedly in the program about trade in gold. Now, today, when we think about gold, we think about wealth and dollars and power and so on. How significant was this trade in gold and in salt and so on in the Ghanaian Empire?
Well, it was significant because they were, if you call it money, they were making money out of it, and because of that, the gold had been used for time immemorial as most valuable commodity. And as a result of that, Ghana became known, perhaps not only within the African continent, it established its supremacy, not only within the African continent, but perhaps it became known to the outside world too. As you can see from the map, from there you get to, say, Spain. From North Africa, you're heading towards Spain. And because of the gold, I'm inclined to believe, I haven't seen any historical record, but I'm inclined to believe that Europeans or Caucasians are likely to hear about this ancient empire because of this its wealth in gold, and they are likely to have traveled. You can see the route. They might probably travel right down to the north and travel across this route to the then Ghana. So it became that famous.
Right. Now, I understand that the trade in gold, the trade in salt, as well as trade in other commodities,
yes, cloth and
there was also a system of taxation.
Taxation, yes.
These goods were taxed, and this formed quite a bit of the treasury for the empire.
Definitely so.
As well. What about the situation of farming and so on? We talked a lot about the gold. Was there? Did this form a significant? Do you know if this formed a significant portion of the revenue, or was this more or less a lesser kind of activity for the?
Well, I think records tends to show that probably it was much more for subsistence. Farming was intended to sustain the people. I think their wealth came really out of that particular trade.
Right.
Yeah.
In the closing minutes that we have on today's program, I'd be interested in getting your assessment of the impact of that Ghana had on the world at the time and since. What would you think would be some of the significant impact that not in terms of its immediate environment, but in terms of the larger then world community?
Well, as I mentioned, it developed a strong civilization. It had a strong administrative system. If you compare it to some of the empires that we've known in history, just like the British Empire and some of the other empires which had existed, and Ghanaian Empire definitely existed before the British Empire. But even if you compare the administrative structures, you'll be amazed to know exactly, that they were well organized, and the fact that they had valuable commodity, or were able to lay their hands on valuable commodity, which is gold. And you know how this gold is even to us in today's.
How significant was this trade in gold, say, to other places in the world? You talked briefly about Europe, but would it be fair to say that most of the world at that particular point in time their economies depended upon the gold from?
It's most likely so. It's likely to be, because according to records, the route was quite dense, you know, very, very heavy traffic going up and down. And it's,
Of course, the American sources of gold would not have been found at that particular point in time.
no, I doubt it. I doubt it. America at that point in time didn't exist anyway.
Right.
So,
Right. So probably the dependence on the gold from this particular area would have
yeah.
been great. You've mentioned about the resemblance in customs and traditions between the ancient Ghana Empire, which we've discovered was some 1,000 miles north of
Right.
present-day Republic of Ghana, the similarities in the customs of the people. Would it be fair to say that, what would you say would account for that? Is it because of the knowledge of the area, or because people from there perhaps have migrated to present-day Ghana, or?
Well, definitely there are records showing that even in library sources around here, like the House Library, you find documentation which definitely showed that there was a definite migration from that part to our present abode. As far as modern Ghana is concerned, we know that people who live in the north, northern Ghana, have lived on in that particular area from time immemorial. But the Gael-speaking people like the Ashantis, the Fantis, the Nzimas, the Gans, and so forth, they definitely have traveled from the ancient empire, and their customs and tradition definitely attest to that particular fact, especially the Ashanti Empire, which has a strong tradition and link to the ancient Ghanaian Empire.
So would it be fair to say that the Ghana Empire is alive and well in the modern day Republic?
Well, if history repeats itself, then we'll say that it's well and alive. And it's interesting to know that the ancient Ghana had influence on the whole continent and to some extent in the rest of the world. But the history repeats itself that to liberate the continent again from, foreign domination, it was the same Ghana again which had to take the lead in doing so in modern times. And as far back as the late 40s, the 50s, and even the 60s and 70s, modern Ghana has a strong prominence on the continent. It played a very, very significant part in the continental liberation. And not only that, but when you begin to talk about blacks in other parts of the world, such as West Indies and elsewhere, as soon as that nation took its seat on Committee of Nations like United Nations, it began to press for the liberation of oppressed black people all over the world. So it's very interesting to know that the same kingdom or the same empire which was strong thousands of years ago re-emerged in a different spot, but the same spirit existed.
Well, we've exhausted our time. I want to thank you for being our guest on the Black Horizons program to talk about this great ancient African empire.
It's our common heritage.
A common heritage, right. We want to thank you for watching the Black Horizons program. Come back next week when we'll look at another aspect of black history. Thank you for watching.